koutou everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Epic Aotearoa Create a Better Future podcast and In the Service of Others, Who Dares Win series. And we are super excited, Joe and I, to have as our guest Danielle Moffitt. Now, some will say that Harry Moffitt, who we interviewed a little bit earlier in the series, is the husband of Danielle. And I think that's probably the best way to put it in order. Yes, because Danielle's obviously the better half, and more significant half as we explore Danielle's story. But in all seriousness, we're excited to have her on. Danielle has a background in education. We will explore that and dive into that because there's some interesting thoughts around her education and how that's really shaped her and how that's all fit into the family dynamic going forward. She is also the Director of Operations for Stotan Group. This is going to be rather raw. It's going to be rather, I believe, an interesting perspective again from a wife's point of view. And Joe and I have spoken about this earlier when we talk about there's an operator and then there's the operator. And this is behind the scenes and what makes the operators work together. She's also a cricket lover from what I can tell in her email. We won't mention that at this stage, but we're going to get into it because I want to know more about this cricket business, particularly her view on the current Ashes series. So that will be exciting. So without further ado, Danielle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's kia ora. It's lovely to be here, and I'm quite proud to be asked, so honoured to be asked. So thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me.
Absolutely. I think we'll kick off like this in this way, and then we'll probably move around a bit as we go. So I guess the first thing we wanted to do is jump in, is to hear the real story. How did you and Harry meet?
It was a very interesting night. So back in the early 1990s, 1992, on the eve of the AFL Grand Final, I believe, between West Coast Eagles and Geelong. Wow. As a Fremantle girl, I wasn't at all going for West Coast. I was going for Geelong. And Harry was dressed up in a suit. In a quite a baggy sort of 90s suit.
Right.
Yeah, and I didn't know this at the time, but he had been on a close protection course. So he was there with a mate, Brooksy, and a few other guys from the unit. And funnily enough, he was actually eyeing off my friend, Andrea. She was blonde, so she sort of stood out, but we were sort of used to it, and I don't think she was that interested, so he sort of moved his attention somewhere else, and we got talking, and he asked me what I did, and I think I was doing some part-time work as a bookkeeper, and I was at uni, and pretty politically active at the time. It was sort of there were a lot of issues around Indigenous social issues, student unionism, all of those sorts of things. So I was certainly, always was, and always probably will be very firmly embedded on the left. Yep. And I asked Harry what he did, and he told me he was a florist.
I told you as a florist.
Yeah, which is an interesting one. I just took one look at his hands and I knew straight away he wasn't a florist.
Saw right through it.
Absolutely, in a heartbeat. And I actually pressed him and sort of said, "Oh yeah, okay, which florist? You know, oh it's one in the city." And he obviously used this story before because he had one. He actually had one. You know, the old SAS thing, always have a backstory. Right. He still tells me that to this day. Always have a backstory, a reason for being somewhere. So he had his backstory. And then, and things sort of went from there. I went home, he went home. I think I was going to Rottnest with some friends the next day to watch the football, and we went snorkeling and did a whole lot of things. And when I got back, so we're talking about 1992, so I had an answering machine. And so when I got back, there was this little flashing light on there, 9 messages from my mum, and then one from this bloke called Tony, because that was what he was known as back then.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Tony the florist.
Tony the
florist.
florist. Yeah, I've actually the night that I met him, he wrote down his phone number on a I think it was the back of a bank deposit slip that I had in my purse. So I've still actually got it, and it just says,
really,
yeah, Tony with the O with a line through it, like a real military, I don't know, something like that.
yeah.
So when I got back, I've pressed my machine, and there's this message from Tony saying, he wanted to catch up, and I thought, oh, okay, this guy's keen. I went downstairs and I hosed my wetsuit off and came back upstairs. And when I got back upstairs, there's another message from Tony on my answering machine. So he's pretty keen.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the story of how we met.
How you met. Wow. That's hard case. Tony the florist, he's turned his O's into zeros by putting a line through them, because that's just what you do.
Yeah, that's it.
And he's got a backstory to make sure that he's always got a reason for being where he's at.
That's right.
I'm disappointed that he was. You mentioned that he was staring at your friend first and then making his way around. That cheeky boy. Bloody hell. But I'm glad you mentioned that and called him out here, because I'll make sure I rip into him.
Always feel special about that one. Yeah. Yeah.
And the answering machine. So that answering machine, you had the message, you went down, hose up, you come back, and then there was another one. So
in the time that I'd gone downstairs to get all the sand and salt off my snorkeling gear, he'd called again to actually say he was going to a pub just around the corner from where I was living in a little 1-bedroom unit in South Perth near the zoo, and he said, I'll be at this pub from this time, because there were no text messages. It was, it wasn't like you could say, where are you or anything like that. So after that, I sort of thought, okay, so I couldn't call him back. So I thought, that's interesting. So I rang, I was pretty keen. I thought he was an interesting cat. So I rang probably every single friend that I knew to get them to come down with me. And everybody was busy. So I did. I went. I got dressed up and did my hair and whatever, and I took my little Datsun down to the pub. the Datsun with the dodgy CV joints that used to pick all the time. But the worst part about it was I actually had to queue up to get in.
Is that right?
And when if you're queuing up with friends, it's not too bad, but by yourself. Pretty ugly. But and then I guess things sort of went from there, and he told me what he did and didn't mean anything to me at all. I didn't even know what the SAS was.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. Very awesome.
I think that is awesome, because it just highlights, and Joe, perhaps you need to talk to some your contacts into the unit, that when you create a backstory, don't make him sound like a mafia guy. Tony the florist.
Tony the florist.
Tony the florist.
Tony.
Yeah.
Okay, so hey, I love how you've still got that deposit slip with Tony and the number. Do you still have the voice messages?
No, that answering machine died a long time ago, but that would have been a good save, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, that's cool.
I think it's also interesting when you were talking through that, and you obviously the time. I can feel the energy, but the time that you're at this stage of your life, you're being in university, and you're talking about activism, and perhaps this leads us into a nice segue into your education background. So what is it that you were doing at university, and also why that drive towards social activism? What was that driver there?
I don't know. I guess I've always been pretty politically aware. At the time, we had a Liberal government in Western Australia. A Labor government in Western Australia, and a lot of funding was being spent on different things. There was a big push for a treaty in Australia. There was the whole reconciliation movement was really starting to push off. And I think there were lots of things. I think the Mabo case had just started in Australia, so there was a lot of and I think just being in the university environment, it's a political, pretty political hot space, for people to express themselves. I think the other thing too was probably I was actually a little bit of an older student. I was almost mature age. In my early 20s at that point. I didn't go to uni straight from school.
Right.
I worked for a few years, mainly because I was very independent and wanted to get out of home. I have 3 younger sisters.
Yeah.
But I think eventually I came to the realization that I wasn't going to go too far unless I had some sort of formal qualifications. So I enrolled in a bachelor's degree at the time at Kurunkurl, which is the Indigenous Education Unit at Edith Cowan University.
Wow.
And I did my major was Aboriginal and Intercultural Studies. I had health units as my minor, health and addiction studies unit. So they sort of slotted in quite well. So, yeah.
Wow.
Man.
Sorry, you go, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Danielle, what was the draw towards the Aboriginal and multicultural studies? Because I noticed that you then led into specialising down the track and teaching students at risk.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether it was just that that emerging Indigenous activism in Australia, and I felt possibly as a privileged white person, I guess, in a way, that there was an onus I felt some sort of responsibility to educate myself. I think initially at first, I've got absolutely no idea what I thought I was going to do with a degree in Aboriginal and Intercultural Studies as a Wodjila woman living in Western Australia, not employed at that point in the education system at all.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Leap of faith.
A leap of faith. Yeah, and I think that's common for lots of people to get degrees in different things, and then sort of as they head towards the end of their degree, they look at where it will actually apply.
Yeah.
I've always been amazed at how useful my education degree, for example, has been in, and Harry's had said it to me for years, and he always likes to refer to Alistair Clarkson, the ex or coach, I'm not sure whether he's gone yet, but AFL football coach, maybe he says one of the most successful AFL coaches in history. He's a chalky, he's an old teacher.
Wow.
And, there are, instructional strategies, explicit learning, explicit teaching. I can sort of see now, maybe out of education, I can see how that worked really well. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
Beautiful.
That's also. I'm curious to explore a little bit. And in your studies, was there something or some things that really stood out for you? Because you say you come from as you put it, a white privileged background. You're coming into and looking at Indigenous studies and Indigenous culture, and I suspect it would have been a different environment to see how, or different perspective on views and things. But I was just wondering, as you moved into that and you learned a bit more, what are the things that really stood out for you?
I think so. When I say white privileged, I acknowledge that it's my whiteness that gives me privilege in our society because of the infrastructure and the way it's been built. But my background, we weren't a wealthy family. My parents were mortgage belt. We grew up in the eastern suburbs of Perth, which if you're from the east of Australia, that generally is a good thing. But if you're from the west of Australia, you know that I grew up in Maddington and Thornley. My parents built their own first house, and they both worked really, really hard. But it was very early on. I recognised that while crappy things might have happened to us or our family, it wasn't my skin color that made those things happen. It was, just different things. Society was set up for us. So I guess there were a few different incidents, especially after I started studying. I studied with a great young woman called Karen, who was a Yamaji woman from up Geraldton Way. I found her lifestyle and the issues that she faced confronting and interesting. The things that were problems for her were quite different to the things that were problems for me. Her, familial obligations and all of those sorts of things I found interesting, but it probably wasn't until I started working with the Aboriginal Education Unit in Perth that I started to see some issues that made me want to go into education specifically.
Nice. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you speak, Danielle, a dialect of Aboriginal language?
No.
Oh,
no.
okay.
So it's interesting, the comparison with New Zealand and Australia. We have so many. Tyndale's early map showed probably about 600, but we acknowledge that there are about 330 languages and dialects, and we're talking about not just dialects, complete languages where you can be from one part of Australia and have absolutely no idea what somebody on the other side of Australia is saying. So it's a tough thing. I mean, I think it's important to know some local words in whatever whoever's land you happen to be living on at the time. But it's I think Noongar language is taught in a lot of primary schools in Western Australia.
Yeah.
But I think once they sort of hit high school, it's sort of goes out the window a bit.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Danielle. It's really interesting to hear your brief, and this is only scratching the surface of your brief backstory. Eldest of four. So you've got three younger sisters. So no males, no brothers?
Nope. My poor dad. No, he loved it. He would. My dad passed away in 2018, but. He used to get that question a lot. Do you wish you had a son? Did you just keep going because you were trying to get a boy? Is the other one. But he never felt like that. He loved having all of us. So yeah.
Absolutely, I bet 100%.
Wow. I want to I think we might come back to the teacher. But I actually find it quite exciting and interesting to hear this, and it's the energy that's actually getting me, Danielle. And the fact that you've gone, hey, look, there's a space that I want to explore. Forget about the science stuff, forget about this stuff, and the mainstream. This is interesting to me, and I think that's exciting, and also an interesting fact, tidbit, statement, if you will. I'm struggling to think of the word. For those that are listening and thinking about education in a holistic sense, is finding the thing that drives you, the passion. As opposed to, I have to do mainstream. You don't have to, right? And I think you've highlighted that, and I think we'll dive back into that a little bit later on, because I want to hear some of the stuff as you really got onto the ground with it. But let's come back now to now that we've established that Tony the florist, he made the googly eyes. So I first hit the wrong person, and then he obviously found the right person.
Yes.
Right? And then recalibrated. That's it. Yes, and then you guys got together, and then he said, "Well, actually, I'm Harry, and I'm in the SAS." Right? So as you said, you didn't know what they mean, but when did you start to understand what that means, and when did you start to understand how that view formed your view of Harry?
I think it was only when I told other people. So you need to remember that this is before 9/11. So the SAS hadn't really been operational, really. I mean, there have been a few jobs
Yeah.
here and there, but
There's a quiet period for
a
sure.
very quiet period, yeah, since Vietnam. So I guess for me, and I've heard Harry say it as well, is that it was perpetual training. You know, all they did were exercises. I mean, I think it wasn't until after 9/11 that I heard the word deployment being used in any real sense. But I think I got an understanding of the gravitas, I guess, of his role in responses from other people. When I told
Right.
other people that I was going out with this dude, and you know, he was in the army, and I don't know, he worked somewhere in Swanbourne, and people would sort of go, Swanbourne, like, oh, you know, what does he do in Swanbourne? I don't know, he's in the SAS or something, whatever that is. You know? That was pretty much the crux of it. Yeah. So I didn't, I mean, I guess because I had never been out with anyone that had been in the army before, I didn't really even know anyone. So even rocking up to Campbell Barracks, and this was in the day when there were no alert levels at the gate. In fact, you could actually just wander in, you know, like
Is that right?
the Gratwick was open. You know, I took friends up there, you know, like, what we're doing that now. Oh, my girlfriends, you know, you can imagine. I started going out with this SAS guy. Does he have any friends? You know, so
Up in the Datsun.
yeah, exactly. In the Datsun, yeah, pile in the Datsun with the clicky CV joints. But I must say though, my car was better than his car. He had this baby blue Holden Premier. And the first time I got in it, my knees wouldn't hit the ground because he had so many takeaway food containers like on the floor. It was like chicken treat, red rooster.
Oh, that's shocking.
It was classy. He's a classy guy, Harry. But yeah, like you could wander in. I mean, Harry would do things like leave his pass for me at the gate. You know, I mean, can you imagine doing that now? Like, there was no, there wasn't. I don't actually think from memory. I'm trying to remember
There's
whether
no
there was
boom?
boom gate. I don't think there was.
Yeah, right.
I think, yeah, it's pretty strange. So it really didn't mean that much to me. And even when we started dating, he'd just go away on these exercises and come back just minging, you know, stinking. And, you know, that was it. And I did laugh when I heard Helen talking about you, Joe, when you came back home and then you'd be at work and all this sort of stuff, and then you'd be out in the shed like modifying all your kit. Harry and I, he would take me on these drives to all these weird places where they made webbing. You know? And
It's a good date, hey?
Yeah, tape, 100-mile-an-hour tape, like just constantly. Yeah. So yeah, it honestly just didn't mean anything really to me at that point. You know, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can see it. I can see it now. Sorry, Joe. I can see it now. The dates that operators take their future wives with other.
There's a podcast there, just in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was crazy, and it was, you know, what are we doing here? Like, why are we meeting that 60-year-old man who has a sewing machine? You know, because he'd be making this webbing for him. I don't know.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Crack up. And so how long had Harry been in the unit by that stage when he's divulged and let you know that he's an operator in the unit?
I think 2 years. I think he'd been off Rio for a year.
Yeah.
From memory, and yeah, I think 2 years. I think he did selection in 89 or 90 from memory.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was living out. He was living out in a share house in Mullaloo, which is
Right.
miles for me. That was miles
Yeah.
away because I was living down in Fremantle in South Perth, but I'd grown up. Yeah, it was a long way. With some great friends he was sharing with. Yeah.
Awesome. And so did you, during that time, so now that you're finding out what was the catalyst? Because I think Harry spoke briefly about it with regards to when Brian and I had the opportunity to speak with him. But then were you noticing any changes in him whereby there was potentially, you felt that it might have been impacts from work that were coming, and were they coming into the home to you and to your guys' relationship?
Before 9/11, no, not really.
No.
I think there were a couple of trips he'd taken. I think I remember one in particular to Thailand.
Yeah.
There were lots of those sort of relationship building exercises with the Thai Army. I think he did come back from that trip a little bit sad, a little bit reflective.
Yeah.
And looking back now, I look at some of the photos, like the little hard copy photos that we've got of there, and he was playing with a lot of kids. His mum had also recently become really sick. And I think it was a combination of a whole lot of different things. And I think by 1995, I was pregnant with Georgia as well. She's 26 now.
Yeah.
So, I think it was sort of like a whole combination of factors, and he made the decision to get out.
Yeah, right. Okay. And the decision for you guys to then go to the UK from there, was that something that you guys discussed or had been planning or thinking about? Or
yeah, we'd never really traveled together. We never had the money, and then we had kids. The other thing we did was we got married in 1995. So all of these different things, and I decided a few years before to go back and get a postgrad degree in education so I could teach.
awesome.
And there were lots of different reasons for that, but one of the key ones was I felt that it would be good for the kids. Stupidly thinking, I'll be at school the same time as my kids. It would be easy. I can just drop them off and then pick them up. But any teacher will tell you that probably one of the heaviest users of before and after school carer teachers. Yeah. And then I think things were just a little bit blur, and we felt that we needed some sort of change, some sort of reset.
Yeah.
And at the time there was a pretty significant shortage of teachers in the UK, and there was this big push. There were lots of agencies popping up in Australia. Come to the UK, we'll help you set up a bank account, you'll earn all this great money, and the reality was very, very different. But we also thought it would be good because the kids were still quite young, and Georgia was only in early primary school, like year 1, I think, and Henry wasn't at school at all. And I got picked up pretty quickly, even though I had no teaching experience. I literally just graduated.
Wow.
And off we popped with absolutely nothing.
Wow. So that's what I wanted to ask. So you had nothing and basically built yourselves up from scratch.
Yeah, I went over about 6 weeks before Harry, because the school term was starting in January, and Harry came over with both kids after. But the idea was, because we had no money either, like we didn't have like savings. We did it so irresponsibly when I look back now. But we had I can't even remember how much money we had, but it was diddly squat. So I found a place, and rent, is really expensive. Luckily, we weren't in London. We were about an hour and a bit out of London, down in Kent, in Maidstone. And I found a tiny little shoebox of a place, and our luggage, our freight actually hadn't arrived. We took a little bit of stuff over with us, but no furniture, just mostly clothes, toys and kitchen stuff.
Wow.
And it didn't arrive. So Harry, in his SAS wisdom, decided on our first night after they arrived. So he's arrived with a 13-month-old who was a nightmare at the best of times, let alone on a 22.5-hour flight from Perth. And Georgia, who was just traipsing along with her Barbie carry case, and but we had no bedding or anything like that, no furniture. So Harry pulled down these big, ugly, heavy drapes, and that's what we slept on the first night.
Is that right?
And we didn't. It was January. We didn't know how to use the central heating, so we were all pretty cold.
Cold.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. So. But yeah, look, it was all fine. It was a great adventure. Georgia remembers it. Henry doesn't. He doesn't remember anything. Sorry, he has told me he remembers meeting Bob the Builder in a shopping centre. Whether that's a real memory or he's just heard us talking about it, I don't know. But yeah, he's 22 now, so yeah.
We'll just let him believe us. We'll just let him
Yeah,
believe us. Really.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. and so I started work, and Harry ended up getting a job with the Kent County Constabulary. When he applied, we really needed the money, and I remember being at home, and he'd walked through a council estate. So we were totally green about the whole, I guess, social structure of England at the time, and
Right.
for someone to walk through a council estate that has burning cars and it's pretty scary place to walk through, and we lived quite near to it. Harry walked back from that interview, and I was watching from the upstairs window to see whether or not he got the job, because things were really dire. And he did get it, and he loved it, and made some great friends. But yeah.
Can I ask? Did you find that being an immigrant, that your perspective, your mindset changes all of a sudden? Yeah, because being a citizen, an Australian citizen, you grow up, you have those support nets, those safety structures that they're all there. I mean, whether we need them or not, they're there. Then all of a sudden you uproot and you go to another country, and it's just now you're going to fend for yourself. Did you find that became it changed in your mind?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, navigating the system, navigating the NHS, having children, the tax system, all of those sorts of things. But I guess, I don't know, teaching's a really weird sort of industry as far as your peers and colleagues go. I've never worked in an area that has so much support. Like, people will just help you. And yeah, any advice I needed, I just had so many people to go to. I mean, there was this wonderful woman who was head of the maths department, called Mary Williamson, and I was connected up to her through the head teacher of the school, and because she lived around the corner from me.
Yeah.
She knew that, and the head teacher knew that we only had one car, and things were hard because I'd have to get a bus and a train and then another bus, and for Harry to take the kids and all those sort of logistics things. Anyway, so she paired me up with Mary, and Mary just ended up being the most wonderful friend. And she passed away about 3 years ago. She's a few years older than I am, and we kept in touch, to the day she died.
Wow.
I'd go back and see her. She came to Australia. Once, and I don't actually think there was any question I couldn't ask her, for help. We spent Christmas Day, our Christmas Day with her and her family, and yeah, she was just wonderful. So, and there are still probably 4 or 5 people from that particular school that I have to say was a super tough school. It was in the middle of a council estate, so the kids were generally drawn from extremely low socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah.
There were a lot of travelling and gypsy families there, and it was tough. But my teaching experience has shown me that the tougher the school, the tighter the staff. It just seems to be a thing. Yeah.
That actually sounds really like something I think we talked about with Harry, when we talked about team building and so forth, which is the space that you guys work in, the Stotan Group. It's when there's adversity and so forth, and you build that trust, and the tightness of the team comes forward, and you can see that, assuming that there's trust around everything, which it sounded like it was. So it sounds like what we got is, this is your first time teaching in such a hardcore place. It's like, can you do it any harder?
Yeah, I used to. I'd come home with stories. I mean, look, I had nothing to compare it to, so I learned that there were schools just as tough in Australia. Once we came back and I started teaching back home, but I had it was a really interesting place, and not having an understanding of the structure of the socioeconomic structure of how all those little groups worked. I taught 9 kids and their last name was all Hobden. They were all related. But
Wow.
One of the kids, it was amazing. I told Harry this, and he just went, well, how does that work? So one of the boys that I taught in year 8 was the uncle of a girl that I taught in 6th form in year 12.
Far out.
Yeah, it might have been I think it was year 7. He was in year 7. So incredible poverty, and a really sad acceptance of poverty, a cycle of unemployment where nobody in a family has ever actually had any sort of meaningful employment. So you'll have the children have no expectation of working because their fathers didn't and their grandfathers didn't. So, really a really interesting, difficult thing to get your head around. And really made me appreciate our privilege in Australia. As big as the divide is, there are a lot more safety nets, I think, around us, and expectations are a little bit higher, and I think that can be a good thing sometimes.
Yeah, true. That's a great point you make, and man, what an initiation to the education space and all those sorts of things that you've just touched on already. I wanted to ask, so you moved there in 95, so a whole bunch of stuff. Did you move in 95 or was it 96?
No, we moved to the UK in 2001.
Oh, 2001.
Yeah.
Oh, so you were there for what, about a year then?
Yep, just over a year. Yep.
Man, a lot of stuff in that year. But so 95 was when you were married, had Georgia.
Had Georgia.
Was it?
Yep.
Awesome. And that's a lot of stuff happening in that time. Then you spoke about, there was a little bit of a difference, and then you moved after the Thailand trip, and then sounded like he's had a brief plan. Didn't have a heck of a lot of savings, but followed your guts and your heart, so to speak, I guess.
We had a lot of sausages and a lot of mince.
And potatoes. See lots of potatoes.
Loads of potatoes and the cheapest Tesco sausages. So you could get 6 Tesco sausages for 99p.
Wow.
So that was a whole meal for, it was a small one, but,
Made it work.
We made it work. And look, we had the luxury of at any point being able to go, me ringing my mum and dad, or, Harry ringing his dad, or ringing anyone and just saying, we're done, we can't do this anymore. Can you send us the money to fly home?
Yeah.
We could have done that. I mean, it would have been embarrassing, and it would have been, it probably might have been tough on my parents.
Yeah.
But we could really have done that. Yeah.
Well, that's nice to know that you could have done that. Have that. Sorry, B, go.
One thing I just wanted to just ask, because this is actually, you set up the time frame quite nicely, because it sounds like we're talking about 2 halves, and you've alluded to this a little bit earlier, and we'll get into the second half in a second. But teaching, What do you love about teaching?
Oh, so many things. Penny drop moments. For me, the actual content that you're teaching isn't really as important, I think, as maybe parents think, because kids learn stuff, they learn stuff, especially these days, so quickly. The relationships are really important, and I think if you can have a great relationship with kids, you can teach them anything, you can pass on anything to them, or you can make them start to think critically, maybe for the first time, asking themselves questions about why things are the way they are, and whether they can do anything to affect change, or whether they want to affect change, or I don't know, lessons learned. And I think as you get older, I get feedback from, so I used to have this made up rule back in the day where teachers I used to tell the kids this, because when they'd finish school, they'd go, "Oh, can you be my friend on Facebook, miss? Can you be my friend?" And you go, "Oh no, there's an education department rule where you can't accept a friend request from an ex-student for 5 years." It was really funny, because exactly 5 years later, I'd start getting these random friend requests. But look, from those random friend requests, I've had such great feedback. You get great feedback from kids, and if you follow them or whatever, and you're just looking on what they're doing and what they're up to, it's great to see them to see them doing really cool things and getting on with their lives, and finding out lessons that you have even forgotten that you taught them, and they pull back come back on you. I had a student not that long ago. She said to me, "Miss, I still remember when we were doing finance or budgeting or something like that," because I used to teach stuff that wasn't in the curriculum all the time. Like if we were doing economics, I rarely, particularly if it was a group of at-risk kids, they don't need to know about a flow chart, about an economic flow chart. They don't need to know that. What are they going to use that for? So I used to have this, I've still got it. I scanned it, a copy of my credit card statement from 1987.
Wow.
It was a shocker. It was an absolute shocker. So I've got a credit card, and I used to use it as a teaching resource, and it had my full name, Danielle
All your
Moffitt,
details.
all the details, my address at the time, all this sort of stuff, the card number, and they'd add up, the amount of interest I paid. And this girl said to me she said, "I still remember that you paid almost 3 times as much for that bag at Myers than you actually paid for it." You know what I mean? In interest. And so I don't know, that sort of feedback is always really nice, because that as even though that's a really small detail, it's made some sort of impact, and that she remembered it as well. That's embarrassing that you remember that. Of all the things I taught you, you remember my ANZ credit card statement. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's so good to hear, that the connections that have been forged and developed and built over that time through your efforts, because it's not easy being a teacher, and to be able to do that, and then have I would imagine it's probably not only quite funny, but somewhat fulfilling to know that you get these random messages 5 years later from former students wanting to connect, because that's a testament to the impact that you've had on them, Danielle, and that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I have it's funny that the teaching thing was really interesting, and I know you've said that there are 2 parts, and there definitely are, but I think in 2004 I started a long-term teaching position.
Right.
At a school in Perth, and at that particular point, quite a few students were starting to come in from Afghanistan, and which was really interesting for me, because Harry's in Afghanistan, and I'm teaching these kids, that are coming in with no English, with trauma, but there was one particular student, and I'm sure he'll probably Google my name and find this at some point, but his name was, he was known at the time as Abdul, and he loved cricket. Afghani boy. He loved cricket. So we used to have this little, so he was 12 when I started teaching him.
Wow.
And had a long road to get to Australia, Indonesia, all sorts of different places to get here.
Yeah.
But he said to me one day when he was, I think he must have been in year 9, he said, Miss, one day, we're going to go and we're going to watch Australia play Afghanistan at the cricket. We'll go together. And I said, oh, I don't know, Abdul, is that going to happen, And sure enough, that's exactly what we did.
Really?
He would have been 24, I think, a few years ago, and we met up, and I went over and stood with the Afghani team, and I brought an Afghanistan flag. I was the only woman. There were no women in there at all. And we sat and we did exactly that. We watched Afghanistan get absolutely pantsed by Australia. It absolutely didn't matter. It was good. So you do have those. You can have those really long-term connections with kids. So yeah, he's living with his wife in Germany now. So.
Oh wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, he's a ripper.
Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely wonderful that you've shared, and that's a great. Again, as Joe said, I echo that. It's a testament to how you see it, and it also as you started to talk about that, I'm getting the sense that the who dares wins mindset is actually something that permeates your whole household, your whole family, because not only do you go to some country over there, that way for me, and and you just uproot. And then you say, "Oh, let's do that," and you go into you go to all these different experiences, and I mean that absolutely respectfully. But typical, what struck my head, what thought came in my head was a typical Australian: go off script. just go off script.
Yeah, I would call it irresponsible now. 53-year-old me says, "What an irresponsible thing to do."
But I think. And then beautiful story that you talked of, Abdul. So Abdul, if you're listening, shout out to you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is probably that nice segue into the second part of the journey so far, and it's still an evolving journey, which is wonderful. So you're in the UK, and Harry, he's with the Kent Constabulary. I can't even say it. The police.
Constabulary.
Constabulary. Shows my English, just my skills. Anyway, he's with the police, or as sometimes we say in some parts of New Zealand, the popo, and he's been pulled off there, and he's because I think he mentioned that a South African saw his CV and said, "Nope, you're coming down to the shooting range," and so forth. So. It sounds like then, if I'm reading between the lines, he's starting to get itchy feet, perhaps, about going back to the unit. So how did he start to broach this subject with you? And how did you feel?
When I actually still remember when he told me, and I remember being really angry because, not because I didn't want him to go back in. So remember, I've had no experience with operational SAS, I guess, he'd never been deployed. So I was a bit naive. And I remember thinking, what did you get out for in the first place? We could have been, because things were tough. We'd gone from a regular wage and all of that sort of stuff. And the period leading up to us going into the UK, Harry had done a few bits and pieces, but he was a bit lost. He was working for a builder, which he really loved. He'd done all sorts of things, to support the family. Yeah. And that's really funny, isn't it? I was actually angry because what did you leave for? It's been a whole waste of time. Like we just wasted,
I could understand that because I'd be like, we've been here eating Tesco sausages
Exactly.
and in Perth. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And I think I don't know. I was very absorbed in teaching. I We'd only ever planned to go over for a year. We said
Right.
a year, and then if it went longer, we were just going to absorb it. And I knew that I knew he'd been on a few calls. He'd been in touch with a few old mates, and I wasn't. I don't think I was like him. So he was sort of a little bit worried that he'd be too old. And I think he was only 31, 32, or something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
But that part of it never occurred to me. And I think by the time he'd sort of made the firm decision, I think we'd already done the first rotation. Australia had already sent one squadron.
Yeah.
I think was the first rotation for Slipper. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just that was just that part of it, and then it was exciting. You know, then it was you know, do we get to live in the married patch? I'd never lived in there. I'd never lived there before. You know, we'd always lived out.
Yeah.
We get to live in one of those, you know, those big houses in Seaward Village, and you know, how's that going to work? And it just went on from there. And then I guess there was a little bit of relief as well, because I thought we're actually going to be going back. Like there was some purpose and meaning in going back. And the UK is a hard place to live. Everything is hard, you know. So.
Oh, awesome! And Danielle, on that, so did you end up staying in the patch?
We did. So Harry went back in January of 2002, and I had to keep teaching. Georgia was still finishing out her school year.
Right.
So she stayed with me, and we stayed with my beautiful friend Mary. And then we came back to Australia in April. So Harry went back to Perth by himself, or sorry, he took Henry. I made him take Henry. There's no way he was leaving Henry with me. He just continued on his training and did selection, and we did end up when I arrived with Georgia in early April, end of March, early April, we moved into the house the same day that I arrived. So we went from the airport to this house, and going from a, you know, 2 up, 2 down in Maidstone, tiny little place, and we had borrowed furniture and you know, the trading post furniture and all that sort of stuff, and all of our gear when it arrived fitted into a big pile just in the middle of that right? Room. So we had to start again.
Oh wow, that's awesome. That's such a cool, like those experiences, those that you have gone through have, you know, I can imagine have really helped shape and forge and build the resilience of not only Georgia and Henry, I would imagine, in terms of how they are, but the appreciation that comes through those experiences and that sort of thing. Mind you, Henry has mentioned he doesn't remember it apart from the Bob the Builder piece, but I'm sure he's reminded enough and is aware enough with parents like yourselves to be grateful for the things that he has, which is awesome.
Also, I'm wondering if in that, as you talk about that move, did you notice a change in Harry? Is there something that perhaps you know, maybe it's a spark, maybe that's not quite the right word, but do you sense something that's a little bit different about him in say a positive sense, or perhaps the opposite now that you moved back?
I think the word spark is exactly the word. There was definitely a new meaning and purpose behind what he was doing, and I guess also there was in those early days. I mean, it's different now. We know. I mean, even the general population knows a lot about Afghanistan because it's been, you know, Australia's longest conflict. You know, Australia and New Zealand's longest conflict, 20 years. But I think there was a lot of learning about this weird place, Afghanistan. Where is it? You know, the tribal structures, all of the politics, the history, all of those things. So I think he immersed himself in a lot of that. But again, there wasn't a lot of information. So he was around. So he was basing, he had to base his learnings on what defence was saying, you know, on the briefings from them.
Yeah.
But yeah, there definitely was. I think he enjoys the ability of what his body can do as well, and I think that part of it for him at his age was refreshing, that he realised that he could still do, you know, what he liked to do. He could still push himself, and you know, that whole concept is really foreign to me. I'm not an exercise person. I'm not. That's not my shtick at all. But I have one of those 10,000 kilometre step counter things on my phone, and sometimes it's like in double digits, you know. whereas Harry does, you know, probably 5 times as much as I do, you know, in a day, without even actually doing any exercise. Just general demeanour. But yeah, I think he was really excited, and I think it was, you know, like a lot of older operators will say, this is what he'd been training. He'd trained to do this for, you know, for 7 years or 8 years or whatever it was before, you know, and never actually been able to do it for real, you know, and now he could do it for real. So,
and so how, and with that, it's a really good point good points that you bring up, Danielle. How were you during this time? So now it's like it's time where the rubber's about to meet the road now, or is meeting the road, and the reality's setting in that your husband is going to be deployed, the father of our children is going to be deployed. How were you feeling, and how did you, because then that's the commencement of a long period of time away, the next 11 or more operational deployments, extremely high risk, uncertainty, all that sort of stuff, and the impacts that has on you, which is really what we want to hear about, your experiences. How did you start to, or what started to go through your mind, and how did you start to approach that when he started to deploy?
So I think we got notification in probably early July. I think Harry's first deployment was August, because it was just before my birthday. So I remember, and I remember thinking, I know, but now I just go, hell, big deal, like, because you become so desensitized to birthdays, Christmases, you know, all those sorts of things. But I was a bit nervous, but I also hadn't been back in Australia. I'd only been back for, you know, 4 or 5 months or something like that. So I was still overwhelmed from all of those other things as well, you know, getting the kids settled, moving into the patch. That was eye-opening in itself.
I bet.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess, I mean, the kids probably were the biggest distraction, but I don't know. I get that everybody is different, but I'm a real pragmatist, and I do things to I don't know, to distract myself, I guess, or to actually help myself stay focused. I do things. I have to do things. So I don't know, when there's a terrible situation or there's a catastrophe or something, I'm not the person hugging. I'm the person that's already organised to go and pick up that person's kids from school, or
gotcha.
I've started making. I deal better with situations, you know, for good or bad. It doesn't always mean that's a healthy way to respond. So I guess for me, being distracted by those practical things was a good thing at the time. I was too busy. It was all a bit new as well. You know, there'd only been 2 rotations, I think, at that point. And I knew a few other partners in the village who had sort of said it's not that bad. Interestingly, though, they weren't operator wives. They were attached people.
Support.
Attached support staff. So, so I guess a bit naive. I don't know.
No, but that's cool. It's good to hear from your perspective, especially in those, and coming from that that side of things as well, like hearing you speak, because I know that it's going to help people to hear, because I'm imagining that this mindset that you've had, because the question was in relation to just the starting, did that start to change or evolve for you? Obviously, you've got two children. One child's going to be enough to keep anybody busy with regards to what needs to happen. But did your mindset and thought processes start to evolve and change? Did you start to become more worried or more planning ahead in case the worst happened, sort of thing? Did all of that stuff start to evolve and manifest itself and at different times during the next sort of 11 years?
Yeah, it did. I guess probably one of the most confronting things was being the irresponsible people we are. We'd never looked at a will in our lives. Like we'd never done, had that conversation. We didn't have anything, so it didn't matter. And B, I don't know, we just never really thought of it. So that having that conversation is always really interesting, and doing things like power of attorneys and things like that, so you can do stuff when they're away. But yeah, I don't know. I was never. I always remember Harry making this joke. Don't worry, Dan. When all the shit goes down, I'll just be out of there. Like I'll just be running as fast as I can. It's like, all right, that's reassuring. He said, I won't leave anyone behind, but don't worry, I'll try hard to look after myself. But yeah, I don't know. I think I always had some sort of faith in his ability. I think that was probably a key thing to that, and that I'm one of those people where I'll look around and I'll go, you know what, there are lots of other people doing this as well. And I mean, families like Helen, had no family support. I had 3 sisters and my mum, plus all my girlfriends. It was tough, but I couldn't imagine doing it alone. And there were other women in the village that had posted in, had been in Perth for 5 minutes because, they'd come from Sydney or Townsville or had done exactly what you'd done. You'd come over first and then, some wives had actually come over to Perth after their partners had been deployed. So they didn't even,
that's tough.
Some of them didn't have driver's licenses, all those sorts of things, I guess, that are empowering without us really recognizing that they're empowering. I used to see this gorgeous Thai lady that I got to know later on, and I used to see her walking all the time, and I just always assumed she was like, walking, fitness walking sort of thing. No, she wasn't. She was walking to the bus to take her kid to school because nobody had told her that there was actually a school closer that she could go to. So she'd enrolled her child in a school like 5 suburbs over because she didn't. And that's that, I guess, going back to that little social justice thing. They're the little things that really get on my wick because someone hasn't reached out to her properly, appropriately, and helped her. So she's been forced to make poor choices because she didn't have the information. So, I
think that in itself is fascinating. In both senses, the positive sense and the negative sense, in that in your, I guess, in a little bit of the write-up that we asked you to do at the start, before we started this podcast, there's one of the things you talked about is support during the deployments. I can imagine, Harry's going through 11 deployments, but it's not Harry. It's Harry, it's Danielle, it's Georgia, it's Henry. That's the whole family going through 11 deployments. So I suspect after a while, you get into a routine, but you see these other families or other wives or what have you, family groups that are still looking for different things. They're essentially immigrants into that little community, if you will. Did you see it change over time, the level of support or the type of support to families?
Yeah, very much so. So the early days, we were always just told. I look back on it now and laugh, but they used to say, "Oh, because there's a lot of gossip, in the village. People talking about this and that, and they're going here and they're going there and they're doing that, whatever." I don't have a full understanding of what they're doing, but yeah, they'd have these. The saying was, "No news is good news." Like, how appalling! Like, it's about. It reminds me of that word tolerance. Putting up with. Like, no, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. So they started having these family briefings. And at this stage, so I stayed home with the kids for a little while, like did the stay-at-home parent thing, but it's not my thing. And so I started work. I started doing a bit of relief teaching, and I got a long-term contract here and there. So my daytime I was at work.
Yeah.
So but they'd have these family briefings at 10 a.m. on a weekday, and I'd go like, well, I can't go to that. I work. But a lot of the women weren't. Most women in the village weren't working, during normal time. So that was a real issue. So I spoke to someone at my work and I said, look, there's another briefing coming up. This was while Harry was deployed. Can I have the time off to go? Yeah, no problem. At this stage, everyone was a bit sort of, if they found out that you had a deployed partner, they were all a little bit pitying, like, oh, of course you can, I must be terrible. So anyway, so I've gone to this briefing and it was just nothing. It was literally no news. It was like, here's Afghanistan, here's the number for DCO, Defence Community Organisation. Here's the number for the special needs support thing. Here's the number of toll transitions. Here's defence housing. And that was pretty much it. I'm like, I took the morning off work for this. It was just nothing. But they definitely got better. They I think maybe during Catalyst, they did a family night. So I of course I'm I wasn't happy with that, so I made my thoughts known.
Yeah, cool. Good.
Yeah, and their response was, but that means we need to have staff available after hours. Yes, yes, you do. But I think they did another one during Catalyst, and they said they were going to make it in the evening at where was it? Maybe at the house, and at the sergeant's mess, I think it was, or the officer's mess, one of them. And it was going to be a slide night, and we'd be able to see photos of our partners and our kids' dads. So bring the kids.
Right.
It was a ripper. So they started it at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. There are people with like lilies there. I mean, my son at the time, I think, was in bed by the latest 7 o'clock. John was there. 7 o'clock. So that was a ripper. That was a good start. So Henry was whingy and went a bit psycho running around, and then there were blues between the kids, and then this thing starts, and there had to have been 200 slides. And so every single child and partner is just sitting there waiting to see a shot of their dad. Of course, what happens? Harry's right at the end, so kids missed him because they'd run off. Come back! It's going to be Dad. No, you've said that 20 times, and it isn't Dad. So look, over the years, things definitely got better. Yeah. And I think I always used to encourage people to give the LO feedback. So I wasn't popular with a couple of the LOs, but I hope that it improved things, like that feedback from me and from other wives improve things. But yeah, Defence can be a tough, as you know, Defence can be a tough organisation. They have rigid rules, and they're rarely movable rules. Not much flexibility there.
Yeah. Man, that side of things, and I'm so pleased to hear that at least things started to by the sounds of things, get better. Grateful that women like yourself would take the time and put themselves out there to give that feedback, because like the whole point of this is to try to shed a light on that. I was speaking with a friend of mine who's still serving in the unit in the New Zealand one here today, and he's spoken about some hardships that some friends and guys and that they're having at the moment, in particular relationship-wise with their spouses and stuff like that. And that's sad to hear, because a lot of times there's stuff here which I want to ask you, what do you think are some of the, maybe more pertinent or relevant topics or things to address to help strengthen relationships? Because one thing I just want to quickly acknowledge is, one, you allowed Harry to be on the podcast with us on your guys' 26th year wedding anniversary for one. And I was, when he mentioned that, like however far we were into the podcast, I was like, what? Like, there's no way my wife would be like, are you serious? So one, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
But how the strengthening of your guys' marriage and relationship is something that Harry touched on, a few rituals and things like that. So really keen to hear your thoughts around this. What advice do you have for spouses, partners, and for the male perspective from the person serving who doesn't, like I was oblivious to probably 90+% of the stuff that my wife shared. And it's only been through that podcast that Brian did with her that's opened my eyes more, and why we really wanted to reach out and have the wives like yourself come on and speak. What are some of the things that you would want not only the operator to be aware of, the male side of things serving in the unit, but also for the wives, for the spouses to be aware of, to either have courage in to do, because it's clear that you have an enormous amount of courage to be able to do the things that you do and have done. What advice would you share and give to our audience today, looking back with all the knowledge and experience that you have today?
I would carve out space for myself. I wish I'd done that more.
Can you elaborate on that more, please, as well, Danielle?
Yeah. So we have a couple of Harry's friends have a running joke with him, and they talk about the Harry show. Oh, the Harry show's here. Wheel out the Harry show. Tells his stories and with respect.
Yeah.
Tells his stories, but I think when you are when your partner is someone that has a high profile, Harry's always been a bit of an overachiever. So things that he over-engineers everything, and he admits that part. But it can be hard sometimes when you are a normal person, when you're not an overachiever, when your skills and gifts, I guess, if you like, are not on display all the time, are not visible to everybody. I know. I think when Harry saw me teaching for the first time, I remember at the time he said, "Wow, that was really cool. Like, I'm not quite sure what you did and how you did it, but it was really good. Like your connection, I don't know." When you're doing supervising a teaching student on a prac, we say, oh, they've got the X factor. They've got this thing that, it's a little bit hard to articulate. And I think when you're a normal person, it's hard to get that space and to sort of stand your ground without having to move back in, to sort of fade in the background a little bit. And that might sound a little bit strange because I sound confident and all of those sorts of things, but when you're up against someone like Harry, it's sort of a little bit, well, what have I done? But then you have to sort of, as you get older, I sort of think I've gotten a little bit more perspective, and I can sort of say to myself, well, I actually did an all right job. Like my kids are okay. Yeah, you can sort of go, that was actually a really hard gig, over a long period of time. So it's quite draining. But I think you're recognizing your own skills and all that. Just the whole management of a household, because you effectively become your partner's manager.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? Like you do all the things that he's not doing, that all of the things that he can't do because he's in country, or all those little admin things and I know a lot of partners do those things anyway.
Yeah.
For their partners, but whether they're deployed or not. But I think, I don't know, Harry's family's birthdays, they're not my family. Why do I have to do all the work and make the calls and, all of that sort of stuff, all of the kids' events, most of those Harry wasn't there for.
Yeah.
And I guess it's sort of, I one of the photos that I sent you was of me with Georgia and Henry, and it was at Henry's pre-primary or kindy graduation, and it was just quite a symbolic one because there we go, not there again. Another photo without Harry in it.
Yeah.
And the Christmas one was the same, the kids opening their presents, and it's a really hard thing. You're effectively your partner's manager. You manage all of those things.
How did you continue to just move through that for so long? Because I know, sadly, even with some of the guys that I was fortunate to serve with there, went through difficult, complete divorces after being married for years, and the effect on their kids and obviously on them as well, because I noticed that in them there's quite a significant change in them. But how are you able to just stay by Harry's side and be there and do the amazing things that you've done?
Well, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. Because I'm so stubborn, maybe that's it, I don't know. I would never turn around and go, right, Mum, I'm moving back home and I'm bringing the kids. I don't know. Harry and I don't know when it was, but at some point we sort of made this, as stupid as it sounds, because it should be your wedding day that you make that commitment, but we sort of got to a point where we actually started looking around us at the couples that we never ever in a million years thought would split up, and they were splitting up. And I think it almost consolidated the marriage a little bit, which is really strange.
Yeah.
But ironically, definitely his service has been one of the things that, chaotic situations, and it tightens that bond. It reaffirms that, that commitment. And I think Harry always sort of has a thing in his head where he feels like he owes me, which is sort of nice in a way, but the other thing is, it's like, well, you don't really, you worked really hard, and, there are lots of things that he has had to deal with that have been a result of his service, and that he probably will for the rest of his life. There will always be parts of his service that he's going to really regret, but I think it's really unhealthy to just sit there and go, I wish I'd done that, I wish I'd done that. How could I have done this differently? Funnily enough, I actually resent Harry's commitment to Applecross Cricket Club more than I resent his service.
What's that about? Can you tell us about that? Applecross Cricket Club?
Applecross Cricket Club, yeah. I love them now, but by golly, I dated them at the time. So Harry has a great theory. I don't think it's his. I think he's picked it up, I believe, from Dr. Preston Klein, who's also a friend of ours,
right?
With the Mission Critical team, about having a third thing.
Yep.
So my joke is Harry had a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth thing, but probably his most important one was Applecross Cricket Club. So he would try and play as many games as he could while he was home. And then obviously when he was deployed, so he couldn't get his match numbers up, he away. But I know for a fact that there were times if he flew in from a deployment and it was a Thursday, I know for a fact, he probably doesn't even know this, I know for a fact that on the way home,
he went there first.
He stopped off at Strickland Reserve Yep. Because it was selection night or something like that, or fines night or something. So, but yeah, and I know that's sort of one of those things that I know Harry regrets a little bit. While he loved his cricket, it's sort of, or his third thing, or fourth thing.
Fourth thing.
I know, fifth thing. I know that there's a bit of regret there where he took advantage of that. You know, took advantage of the fact that I didn't know that he was back in Australia. But I had eyes and ears everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah, but I think I don't know, that going back to advice for other partners.
Yeah.
I guess I had a third thing as well, or I tried really hard to have a third thing, and I guess a third thing, I think Preston says one of the things about a third thing is it has to be almost like a SMART goal, like it has to be measurable and achievable and specific and all those sorts of things. And having the kids and working and Harry being away, I always assumed I was going to do something alone. So I always assumed, and if Harry was here, it was a bonus. But if not, my head was in the fact that I was going to be doing that particular event, going to this thing, doing this activity by myself.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the pragmatist in me. But my third thing was gardening, and it was, you know, achievable for me. It was in my backyard. I didn't have to go anywhere. You know, I could stick a DVD on for Henry and he could watch it, or he'd come out and, you know, with his butterfly net or whatever, or, you know, or dig holes or burn things. He loved a magnifying glass. Henry loved a magnifying glass. But yeah, and still to this day, I still love it. I don't wear gloves. I don't wear safety boots or anything. I have to touch it. I have to feel it, and awesome. Yeah. And I guess that was sort of what I could do. That was the third thing that was in my capability. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so do I, because it you can sense the grounding. Yeah, touching the soil, the grounding of that to keep you almost level and balanced. And I think this is actually important for those that are listening. I feel that particularly partners that are with people in a high risk environment, first responders, what have you, is to have that third thing as you do it. But be aware that there's also a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth.
Fourth, fifth, yeah. It's funny, Harry will still refer to those other things as his third thing, but it's like, no, well, you need to make a choice. Which one is it? Cricket? Your band? You know, is it writing?
Oh, yep. I have to actually ask this, Danielle, because we noticed in your bio you went to performing arts school in Fremantle back in the day. So, and then of course Harry's got this band. So I'm thinking, did you front for the band? Were you like the lead singer for the band?
Have you heard them sing?
Well, that's why they do heavy metal.
Really not, Brian.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've sung a couple of songs over the years, but yeah, it's they're very loud. Yeah, they're very loud. But yeah, I have, and we enjoy it. We have a little sing along every now and then, and
nice.
Yeah. I think I got upstage at the Grat Week once. That was only a few years ago. I don't know how many wines I'd had, but it was a good night.
It was a good night.
Yeah.
As long as it was a good night.
Yeah, I'm so sure someone's got some camera footage somewhere. Yeah, great. But yeah, I guess pushing yourself forward, having other things, a lot of the same rules, you know, I guess, or same advice that Harry gives, you know, having something outside of defence is really important, especially in terms of people. You know, it's a very, you know, defence is a very institutionalised way of thinking. I mean, when Harry got out almost 2 years ago now, he needed to go to the doctor, and he didn't know how to go to the doctor because he'd normally just go to the RAP.
Go to the RAP, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have a Medicare card and all of those sorts of things, you know. You know, he didn't. What do I do? Do I just rock up? No, you need a Medicare card, and well, how do I get one of those? And then, you know, I guess, you know, this is the thing with transition, isn't it? You expect that everybody outside of defence is going to be as efficient as people inside defence. And Harry having to go to Centrelink, that wasn't a pretty, you know. I got a series of text messages from him while he was sitting there. You know, he reckons that when they called his name, they went, Anthony Moffitt.
They do that in the hope that you don't come up. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
I've got this vision of him at Centrelink trying to get everyone to stand to attention for some reason. I don't know why.
To line up.
To line up.
He couldn't understand why something was going to take more than 2 hours, and I think it took 3. Yeah. You know, it's that's how the rest of the world works. You know, people are not.
And that's a great point. I was just going to ask. So, as much as there's a transition for Harry coming out, did you notice you needing to transition and change in the sense that, okay, my husband is around more. He doesn't know how to go to the doctors down the road. He needs a Medicare card. Like, there's stuff that's probably going to... Was there I guess in some way, an adjustment process or adjustment maybe for you to having your husband home and present more, and him needing your help even more so now? So he still needed your help to maintain the home and the children while he's away, but now he needs your help even more to just try to adjust and get used to the way things actually are.
Yeah, so I think his last deployment was 2012 or 2013.
Right.
And I think, so he's still been in defence, still institutionalised, but transitioned out in 2019 or 20, 19. Sorry, it's all a blur. Maybe it was 20. And yeah, a little bit, like my identity was a little bit. So now I was just like the partner of an ex-serving member rather than, you know, a current serving member.
Right.
But I think everything else, I don't think, I always tried pretty hard not to base my identity on his, you know. And I think having done it for a really long time, that wasn't sort of that hard. Yep. And being around other people who are the same as you know, I mean, we've got friends who have done more deployments than Harry's, and it's like, you know, in those circles, it's not really a big deal. You know, it just is what it is. It's just the job, and it's exciting and it's interesting, and I think the kids sort of look back now and go, wow, that was actually pretty cool that my dad did those things. Yeah. I think mostly they sort of go, just meant that, you know, dad was away, whatever, you know. Yeah.
Could have made me some flowers, like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think, I don't know, working, my support network during Harry's deployments, while it was my family, while it was my friends, all of those sorts of things, and peers, there are 2 other old wives like me who are very good friends of mine. We're still close friends and have been for a long time. But my peer network at work was probably the best support
really
that I had. Yeah.
Why was that?
I stuck a photo in with you. I think it was end of year. Yeah, those shocking shirts.
Yeah, the big loud flowery shirts.
Yeah. We had a theme each year at the Christmas event. They were just a really ripping group of people, sort of diverse in age, so had a lot more life experience than I did. And I guess they never really focused that much on Harry's service. You know, when we had group dinner nights and things like that, you know, they'd certainly ask him questions, you know, and he was quite happy to say what he could. But no, they were just a really understanding, empathetic group of people who sort of got the nuances of Harry's work and how that could sometimes make things frantic, I guess. And it's funny because that word actually defines Harry, is frantic.
Frantic.
In my eyes, everything's frantic. He doesn't see it as frantic or chaotic. He sees it as he's just busy. He just gets stuff done, you know. People to see, places to go. But for me, because I'm, I don't know, a bit more centered and I see that as frantic, that chaos, and it actually makes me anxious. It doesn't give me anxiety, just makes me anxious.
Yeah.
But my colleagues, I guess, understood that that, you know, things in the morning before work didn't always go smoothly. You know that you know, I'll cover your class while you take Henry's lunch money to him because he's forgotten it, or his library book, or but I think they understood that for me, things that were not normal to other people were quite normal to me, you know. And I guess probably in about 2006, so going with the changes in defence and how they handled families, like the liaison officers and things like that. In the early days, they would do the, you know, if something had happened to your partner on a deployment, you know, they'd do the knock on the door, you know, and the, you know, the saying was, if the padre was ever at the door, don't answer it, you know. And there were some horrific stories of, you know, of wives just not answering the door, just turning up stereo, you know, because they knew exactly what was going to happen. But Defence had decided, they were experimenting, they told us, with a few different ways about how we can notify partners. And it's like, I want to hear this. Go away and talk to your experts. You know, people that have had the lived experience are no longer in danger of that happening, and find out the best way. Don't ask us, like, we don't know. Anyway, they decided that that they were that if you were working, they wanted to make sure that you had a trusted colleague. So if you're a teacher, you can't have your mobile phone on in the classroom, or the kids yell at you and say, "Miss, take your phone off." So as a teacher, you know, my phone was off. So my the notification process became at that point that the LO or Defence would contact the deputy principal of the school, because the principal or principal, and then you had a nominated colleague in your department, and the deputy would tell that nominated person, and then that nominated person would go to your classroom. So, so, okay, all right. So I've spoken to my head of learning area, Gail, ripping woman, and she said, okay, cool, you know, who do you want it to be? And I said, well, it's not going to be, can't be you, because you're head of learning area, you're too busy, blah, blah, blah. So it can't be Mark, who's a colleague of ours. He's beautiful, but I said, he'll just cry. He'll just stand there and cry and not know what to do. And Mark agreed. He went, yep, I'd probably cry. And as would Tracy, my other colleague, but it was a bloke I worked with called Greg. And the kids loved him because he was really quiet and moody, and he had a big bushy beard, and they thought he was like some sort of underworld figure, but he actually worked for Greenpeace and you know, things like this. So anyway, so Greg was my trusted colleague.
Yeah.
But what that meant, of course, was that Greg could never, ever come to my classroom door, ever, under any circumstances. Because, so you go back to your classroom, you know, if another teacher comes to the door and opens it, you know, the whole class goes quiet, you know, because they think they're in trouble or they're making too much noise or something like that. So poor old Greg, he could never go to the classroom door. So he used to send if he needed to speak to me, he'd send another student with a note. Gotcha. Mr. Murphy's coming in. So everything's okay. Mr. Murphy's coming in. But by golly, what a bizarre thing to have to ask someone.
Yeah, I reckon.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, you're my trusted colleague. If something happens to Harry while he's away, you're going to be the one that has to come into my classroom and tell me something's happened.
And how did he take that? How did Greg feel, and how did he take that when you let him know?
Well, he and Harry got on like a house on fire. So, and he had a really good understanding, and he was great. And of course, I never wanted him to have to do that.
Yeah.
So we were really lucky that when Harry did have an accident in 2008,
Yep.
it was school holidays, so he got out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just I don't know. I guess it's that normalization of the abnormal, you know.
That's a good way of putting it. The normalization of the abnormal, because it is. This is different from millions of other Australians or whatever in the country that they don't go through something like this or have a process for that. So and actually, that's a nice segue, because I was thinking about that. So how when Harry, he recounted the time when the IED went off and he was driving the vehicle and unfortunately lost a good friend. How did that, and we'll be guided by you on this one, of course, Danielle. How did you feel when you were notified? I mean, the process for that, and I guess the extension of that is when you eventually were able to connect with Harry. What did you see? What did you see physically, mentally, emotionally, and how did you get through that?
It's interesting actually, because when I read Harry's account of what happened, so in the book, and of course I read lots of different versions before the published one, but it was really interesting because I found myself going, "That's not how it happened. That's not like his version was quite different to." Especially the repatriation process. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I don't know that part of it. But the repatriation process was his version was quite different to what I from what I recalled. So it was school holidays, as I said. I can't remember what night it was, but we bought. I'm positive it must have been a Tuesday because it was what we call tight ass Tuesday at the pizza place. It was like $5 large pizzas. So the kids and I, So the kids and I, it's winter, it's July, it's still pretty cold in Perth for Perth. And we're sitting around the dining table, the kids are bickering and eating our tight ass Tuesday pizzas. And I got a phone call from one of Harry's mates, actually. And he sort of said, "No, sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I need to go back. Forget that. Sorry, I got a phone call from Harry." So Harry's on the phone and I've answered it. I'm still scoffing my pizza, telling him he's up because they're bickering over Henry probably picking the pineapple off the pizza. I don't know. And and it was Harry. And so I talked earlier about how Defence experimented with all these different ways of notification.
Yeah.
Well, this was one of their little
experiments.
One of their little experiments, So apparently someone told them that it was much better if the operator, the injured party himself contacted the spouse directly. So if possible. So obviously if they're unconscious, So Harry's called me and he said, hey, how you going? And it's like, okay. And I think I probably went into a rant about stuff, the kids or whatever. And he said, look, there's been an accident, but I'm okay. And my first thing was which one of his mates has been injured, because he said, there's been an accident. And I said, what's going on? And he said, there was an accident and I've been injured and I might be coming home. And then, because he said might be coming home, I thought, okay, it's obviously pretty serious. And I said, all right. And I think I then stupidly said, are you okay? I was like, well, obviously not, because I'm coming home. And he said, look, someone will be coming around to see you. Someone will be coming around to see you. And I was, caught by surprise. And then I said, okay. And he said, look, I've got to go, but I'm okay and it's all good. It'll all be okay. And I've got to go. And I'm like, okay. Well, that was weird. And then, of course, straight away you're going, well, someone's coming around. What, when now? In 5 minutes? Yeah. My question was, do I need to put a bra on? I'm sitting at the kitchen table in my pajamas eating pizza with the kids, you know. And you know, is this person coming in half an hour, 5 minutes tomorrow? Do I you know, need to get my mum to come and get the kids, or you know, do I call his dad? You know, and his brothers? What, you know? But that was resolved in about 7.5 minutes when there was a knock on the door and I hadn't even had time to get to yeah. So so that was the notification, and it was the kids, I think, just toddled off to their room. I think I bribed them with lollies or chips or something after their pizza, and they took off. And then I think from memory, I called my mum to come and get them because I had no idea. It was mainly conversations that I didn't know what was going to happen in those conversations. So, and they were certainly both old enough to understand, but they weren't crying or anything like that. They weren't particularly distressed. They were probably excited about going to nannies or you know, getting a McFlurry on the way to nannies or something like that. It's my kids.
So pizza and a McFlurry.
And then and that was it. And it was, you know, all handled with Defence's brilliant sensitivity. Telling us we could go to the airport, and we're thinking we could take him home, but no, we couldn't.
Wow. So how come what was the story there? So you could go to the airport, but he can't come home. He still needed go to the hospital, or?
Yeah. So because I had no understanding of what the actual incident was, you know, and I guess it's all about how visible the injuries are as well. So, you know, apart from, you know, a few bandages and things, nothing looked, you know, there were no limbs missing. There was no head wound that I could see or anything like that. But it was an infection. So, funnily enough, the tiniest of all of his wounds, it was a bacterial infection that they couldn't discuss or anything like that. So he arrived at Perth Airport with a couple of nurses and some officers, and was whisked off in an ambulance. And we sort of going, can we meet you there? Or
what's the story here? What's the process?
Yeah, so what do we do? You know, and the kids were a bit disappointed because they thought, you know, Dad was going to come home, and you know, we were going to have lamb chops. But so we ended up meeting them at the repat hospital at Hollywood. But I was told not to come for 2 hours, so I had 2 hours to kill. So we went and got pizza because we did that well. And the kids sort of saved Harry this like greasy hard cheese, like called some pieces of pizza. But it was pretty. It was that sort of situation of wanting to be honest with the kids, but also, you know, managing the amount of information they heard. But some brilliant doctors, a couple of brilliant specialists, and he lost a lot of weight and ended up with one leg shorter than the other. But for all intents and purposes, he's good, and I think he's dealt with the issues that he needed to deal with as far as responsibility and all of those sorts of things around the accident. But it was an interesting experience. But when I talk about my pragmatism, the day after I found out about Harry's accident, I went to Myers and bought a really expensive coffee machine as a reward. So it was a distraction and a reward for my
rewards. I'm writing that down. That's why not.
Reward yourself.
Yes.
Add that one to my advice.
Absolutely. these are some incredible experiences, Danielle. I've just been jotting down a whole bunch of notes. I love that particular last one about the rewards. Reward yourself, absolutely. But some of the stuff that has stuck out to me as well has just really been playing over in my mind listening to you speak. And I might mention it a bit later, but I wanted to ask you this point first before I sort of go over some of the takeaways that I've been getting from listening to you speak, and I'm really enjoying this. Was there ever a point for you, Danielle, where you were ever feeling like or at your lowest in terms of, I don't know, it might have been just partway through a deployment that Harry's on, or it might be when Harry's at home, or it might be just when everything, I don't know, felt like things were just crushing in or caving in on you. And so was there a point as the first part, and how did you get through that? How have you been able to cope through that? Because this is a few parts, a bit of background context. It's really inspiring. 26 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, growing up adults now. You're empty nesters as well, which is interesting. It's like, and the next stage of your journey, director of operations with Stotan Group, and you guys have got some incredible connections, experiences, and things that you're doing. But has there been a point that stands out in your mind? I'm sure there'd be many difficult, challenging moments that have occurred, but is there one that stands out maybe above the rest as when you felt like you were at your lowest, and how were you able to come out of that? From your side.
I think the challenges of the kids were those challenges were probably always the hardest, because it's just you know. And I think I don't know, it was sort of a mistake, but I still haven't come up with another way that I could have handled it. So our son was always, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but he was behaviourally, he was always challenging, very, very challenging. So we got a lot of calls from school, calls from daycare, for different incidents. And of course, you know, even when Harry was here, I got the calls, because it was, you know, a lot of the time it was easier for me to leave than it was for Harry, especially if he was in Bindoon or jumping out of a plane or doing, I don't know, or in Sydney, or so even when he was home, he was still away, you know. It was interesting about Helen saying even when you were home, you weren't really home a lot of the time. It was sort of like there physically, but not there, you know. And what I did used to do was I shielded Harry from a lot of this crap. So I would lie. I would just like not tell him about stuff. So there'd be, you know, I remember in primary school, Henry got suspended from school. And it was actually quite a noble thing that he did, but I don't want that to counter all the other shitty things that he did. A boy in his class pulled down the tracksuit pants of a girl.
Oh, right.
So Henry decided he'd deck him. So the school was fabulous. Yeah, the school was really good about it, and they said, we're suspending him in the office. So you don't need to come and get him. But there were all these like little incidents and things like that. And I would just not tell Harry about them. I'd just not tell him at all. I just, how are the kids? Yeah, great. Yeah, really good. You know, because it's that thing of, you know, he's got enough stuff to worry about over there. The last thing I want to do is make him worry, you know, about what the kids are doing. And I think probably every breaking point, because there wasn't just one, there were lots of them. Pick one. Yeah. I think there were lots of them, but I think they were almost always around the kids and about the challenge of managing them. Georgia was always pretty cruisy. She wasn't too bad, but it was only actually a couple of years ago that she told me that there were actually quite a few incidents of bullying maybe at school that
she went through.
She just carried it, yeah. She just didn't tell me, or One of them, she told me recently, was actually a teacher that used to quite was pretty and Georgia was not a difficult child. She was bubbly, and she still is. So I know that it wouldn't have been a behavioural thing. It would have just been this teacher didn't like her and let her know. But yeah, so I guess for them, yeah, I don't know. I guess it was, I didn't want to worry him, but I also didn't want to impact on how he felt about Henry, for example. So when he came home, I didn't want him to like go, Mum said you did this and Mum said you did that. Do you know what I mean? Like I wanted their meeting to be really positive. And so that was probably tough. And I think women are really crappy at hiding bad stuff from other women in particular. So we sort of have this thing where like, oh no, our kids are so great, and oh, they did this and they did that, but they don't show you the ugly side. And if we saw a little bit more of that, you wouldn't feel so bad about your own situation, if that makes sense, So I'm always really open about talking about, when my kids did dirty things, I'd just go, oh, it was just awful, she said this to me, or he said he hated me, and kids say foul, absolutely foul things, and when I've heard people say that, I've gone, oh, it's not just my kids, like it's, you know what I mean, you just have that thing where you think you're the only one whose kids are like that, or that you feel like that. And I think women in particular need to be a bit more open about that,
Nice, I like that.
Being a bit more honest, and yeah.
It's clear to me, or seems very clear to me, Danielle, that you have a really great sense of humor as well, which no doubt complements Harry's probably warped sense of humor, and Tony the florist, and those sorts of things. But I've really loved this conversation, and I just wanted to take a moment here to just sort of acknowledge a few things that I've gleaned from listening to you speak. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I didn't mention there, but I'll touch on now, you mentioned something that maybe Harry and I think I would say you're probably right, because I know I've felt like this, feeling like we owe, or that he owes his spouse, or that we owe our spouse. And in my case, like I do, I absolutely feel like that. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's something that should be acknowledged, not only in your situation, but in all the spouses' situations, because as difficult and as challenging as some of those things are that you go through when you're working in that environment, man, having my eyes opened, having the privilege to do this with my brother-in-law, with Brian, having the privilege to interview people like Harry and Nick and many others, and more to come, and yourself, just makes me even more grateful, and provides for me even more of a sense of responsibility, and a debt that needs to be paid in order to try to help as many people as we can. And what I just want to acknowledge is just your words, your openness, and your vulnerability, and the sense of humor that you have. I'm so pleased that we've been able to have you on this podcast. So pleased with and grateful with what you've achieved, what you and Harry have achieved in not only your marriage, but in business and just in life. You seem very easygoing. You seem very things. That's how it appears. And I think part of that for me is just listening to you with regards to going to the UK. Yeah, there's that moment like, why did you get out in the first place? But to go to the UK, to put up with that, to go through the Tesco sausages and those sorts of things, and just the curtains, the drapes on the ground, and it's a cold place. Like, there's something unique about women like you, and I pick up on some similarities. You just seem to, okay, this is what we're doing, so we're going to go with it. And you're very resilient, resourceful, adaptable, and you've just gone, okay, well, he's doing that, I need to do this. And obviously very pragmatic in the things that you do. But it's a beautiful thing, Danielle. I'm really, really grateful and pleased that you would give us of your time, and that we've been able to connect and hear these things here. You've spoken about a lot of things. I loved how you mentioned, and I hope our listeners will take heart of this, not only the spouses, but also the males, and allow that to carve out space for yourselves, for the spouses, and you need that time. And it's only been now recently listening to these things and communicating with people like yourself that I have a greater appreciation of that. And that's so important, to recognize your own skills, as you mentioned, the things that you do, like becoming Harry's manager, like those skills, obviously adding to the director of operations with regards to what you do, but all the other stuff as well. Even if you weren't working in the education space, the skills that you obtain and develop over that time, just in that relationship, just in that environment, are incredible. Looking around at other relationships, I found that really interesting, because that's probably something that maybe I did subconsciously. I touched on the sadness of friends who went through divorces and the effects on their children, but I found that really insightful, and there's benefit and value in that, as difficult and as sad as it is for our friends.
Yeah.
Having a third thing, or fourth, fifth, sixth, 10th thing in Harry's case, but that's so much value in that as well. And I'm racking my brain thinking, oh, gee, actually, I think I've got a few more than a third thing as well.
Yeah.
So
You got a fourth and a fifth as well. Yeah.
But those are so good. Like, and Harry, your husband spoke about that as well. Having friends, you mentioned, outside of the Defence Force, so important. Having those things outside of the Defence Force, because it's so insular. Putting yourself forward. I love those comments. Connections, I mentioned that. Rewarding yourself, I love that one. And absolutely, you should buy you another coffee machine. Put it on Harry's tab. Yeah.
Put it on his desk. Yeah, put it on the tab, put it on your desk.
But man, I could speak a lot. I want to give Brian an opportunity to speak about a few things here too. But Danielle, I've really loved our time here with you. And I guess before Brian wraps up, is there anything else that you felt that you would really like to speak about, that you feel could potentially be of help or benefit to not only spouses but the guys that are still working in that environment as well? Is there anything that's come to your mind that you thought, actually, yeah, I think this would be helpful, or this is what I've learnt? And there doesn't need to be, but if there is, the opportunity is yours before I let Brian wrap things up. But thank you, Danielle, from me.
You're welcome.
Okay. Danielle, would there be any final thoughts, Danielle?
Oh, sorry. No, probably just connect with people that have done it. You know what I mean? Whether they're still doing it or whether they've done it, I think there's a lot of merit in that. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, great points. Actually, one last one.
Yep.
What communication did you find? Because you experienced a couple, you got Moff to call you, and you potentially might have had the trusted person to contact you and all that sort of stuff. Having gone through that, what did you find, or what would be your recommendation of the best means to communicate to the spouse at home? Having gone through that, what would be your thoughts?
I think they got it right with him calling in that situation.
Nice.
I wish they'd given me a bit of time to get dressed, but that's okay. That's all right. But yeah, I think I think possibly making contact with another family member and going with the family member rather than, depending on how serious it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Thanks, Danielle.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that. Thank you, Danielle. Some just final thoughts. Danielle, I really love this conversation. It's the humour that's really, it's just really shone through. I've actually found it really engaging and hilarious, which actually points a thought in my head that, particularly teaching, because teaching is just one of those underrated. Sorry, underrated. Got that wrong. Underrated professions, but so vital for our children, for our adults, for everyone, because everyone's a learner. But there are some people that are able to express the message, connect with others, and I think you share that quite nicely. It's not the content. Yeah, it's the relationships we build, it's connections, it's the light bulb moments, and that's been absolutely beautiful. I enjoyed the experience that you shared with your third thing, and getting your hands dirty, getting into the soil, really connecting and grounding yourself. I think that's an absolute takeaway for people that are listening. and it doesn't have to be gardening, because whatever it is that grounds people
Yeah.
and finds them in their space, I think that's been absolutely eye-opening. It's just sparked something up in my mind. I also like when you talked about carving your own space. It's not just about the person that has the rifle, respectfully. It's you are part of that journey as well.
Yeah.
And like all partners, so I'm really do appreciate your thoughts. I think Joe summed it up quite nicely. I believe that there are things that people can take away. So for our listeners who are out there, this is a podcast, an episode that we've had from the experiences of a partner of an operator that has been operational. Now that might sound on the surface pretty straightforward, but what we would like you to do and hope you would do is listen to the messages underneath this. All the way through, there have been some nuggets of gold and that you can pull away. So you may not be in the front line, so to speak, but you're still part of the front line. Right. So Aotearoa, the world, the globe, people listening, we are grateful that you've spent your time together with us, be able to hear Danielle's story. So as always, at the end of every episode in the Service of Others Who Dares Win series, Who Dares Wins.
Who Dares Wins. Thanks, Danielle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
both.
you.